Hey everybody, I'm Will Garcia.
And I'm Josh Earl.
And we're the Hoops Guys. And we're continuing our 2014-15 NBA team season previews with a talk on the Toronto Raptors. Yeah.
Yep.
So why don't you tell us about a bit about how this season went for them, Josh?
Well, it went pretty well. They finished 48-34,
Nice.
which allowed them to win the Atlantic and get that third seed in the Eastern Conference. Unfortunately, the playoffs didn't go as well as hoped.
Yeah.
I must say I was immensely impressed by the fan support, especially after the GM Masai Ujiri not so quietly told the other team to F off.
F Brooklyn.
Yeah. But unfortunately, it was like a really bittersweet ending to that season because they were able to get into the playoffs and they played well enough against a very veteran squad to be able to get to Game 7.
Yeah.
And they even had a shot at winning and advancing to the second round for the first time in a long time for them on a last-second shot, thanks in part to a very heady play by Terrence Ross to throw the ball while he was falling out of bounds off of Paul Pierce and thus giving the Raptors the possession. But Kyle Lowry had a shot at the end of Game 7 to send the Raptors and all the fans throughout an entire nation supporting them to the second round. And unfortunately, Father Time, a.k.a. Paul Pierce, blocked it at the last second. So it was a bittersweet season overall. But a lot of good things happened.
Yeah, there was a little bit of bitter, but we're going to talk about the sweet.
Yes.
And one thing that was pretty damn sweet for this Raptors team was that they were really good offensively. They finished 10th in offensive rating, and they really did a good job at getting shots in the paint and converting them, finishing 4th in attempts in the paint and 7th in field goal percentage there. They took a lot of high-value corner threes, which they had a 6th place ranking at corner 3 shot attempts, and they were tied at 10th for converting above the break three-pointers.
Yeah, and on top of that, they got a lot of the most highly valuable shot in basketball, free throws.
Free throw.
Yeah, they finished 6th in free throw per field goal attempt and 5th in converting free throws.
Yeah, their bigs can hit free throws. It always helps.
Yeah, and on top of that, they protected the ball pretty well, finishing 11th.
Yeah, especially for a young team.
Yeah, in turnover rate. And then on top of it, they cleaned the glass so well that they generated a lot of extra possessions out of their offensive rebounds, where they were tied for 9th in offensive rebound rate.
Yeah, that all went very well for this team. And another thing that went really well for them was just defense overall was pretty good. It has to be pretty good to win 48 games. So they finished, again, 10th. They like that number 10.
Yes.
Defensive rating, they also finished 10th. And they really contested opponents' shots well. As you can tell by they finished 10th in effective field goal percentage on the defensive end. And this carried over to shots at the rim, where they were 7th in restricted area defensive field goal percentage, if I can talk today. 2nd in mid-range defensive field goal percentage. And above the break, they tied for 8th in field goal percentage. And then they also did a good job at limiting corner 3 opportunities. They wound up tied for 10th at limiting those. And then, as mentioned, on defense, they did a good job at forcing turnovers, finishing 7th in defensive turnover percentage. I keep confusing percentage and possession.
It's all good. The interesting thing, and you heard the number 10 in that section a lot, they were one of only 4 teams in the NBA last year to be top 10 in both offensive and defensive rating. The other 3 being the Spurs, the Thunder, and the Clippers.
Yeah. Another guy who was good at both offense and defense is Kyle Lowry. He had a really good year. He had 19 points per game, or 19 points per 36 minutes. which a lot of that has to do with the fact that he was stroking hot fire from the three-point line, 38% from there on over 6 attempts per game. And then on top of that, his assist to turnover went really well. He had a career-high assist rate and a career-low turnover rate on the highest usage rate that he has had in his career. So he got snubbed for that All-Star game, and that wasn't very cool.
Pretty majorly. But his backcourt mate wasn't snubbed for the All-Star game last year. Of course, we're talking about DeMar DeRozan. Much like Kyle Lowry, he also had somewhat of a career year. He scored 21.4 points per 36. He had a career high in three-point percentage, defensive rebound rate, assist rate, and usage rate. He also really, really did well at getting to the line a lot. He finished 7th in the entire NBA in terms of free throw attempts per game, and he converted those at an 82.4% rate. So not only was he getting to the line, but he was making them count.
Yeah, and he's one of those guys, sort of like a James Harden, where he can get a lot of free throws on the perimeter.
Yep.
And that's a really valuable skill set. It isn't just that he's driving with reckless abandon and generating fouls. He can get a foul pretty much anywhere on the court. Speaking of on the court, the Raptors had a really good job at staying on the court this year and preventing injuries. According to Dave Feschuk, I probably got that wrong, but he's from thestar.com, and he said that the Raptors were the least injured team in the league in 2013-14 as measured by man games lost. The previous year, when they won 34 games and finished outside of the postseason, they were one of the most injured squads.
Yep. A lot of that is due to how they've embraced the catapult and sports view data type things available now.
Yes.
In terms of their player training, strength and development, and all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was really good for the Raptors, their use of the biometrics, I guess is what you call those.
Yes, bioanalytics, I guess.
Do I look like a science person? I'm really not the best. But speaking of really not the best, there were a couple of things that the Raptors were really not the best at.
Yeah, they didn't really do a good job of getting many shots at the rim. They were dead last in the league in terms of true shot attempts in the restricted area. And on top of that, they finished 23rd in mid-range field goal percentage. And, that was a shot that they took fairly often.
Having said that, I think that most of this team's issues were defensive. They finished 21st in defensive XPPS because they were giving up analytically valuable shots. Shots at the rim, they were 21st at preventing them. Shots in the paint, 24th. Mid-range shots, they gave up the 9th fewest. Corner threes, 26th, and defensive field goal percentage. So those sorts of shots that you want teams to shoot, they weren't forcing those. They were giving up the good looks.
Yeah. But, that was last season. They added some people this offseason that'll hopefully make things a little more interesting and address some of these issues. One guy, Lou Williams.
Oh, yeah. Lou Williams is a combo guard. He's pretty capable of breaking down the defense off the bounce. And he isn't really like a lights-out sort of shooter, but he's good in catch-and-shoot situations. Whether or not he'll get very many of those in this offense, I'm not so sure. But he's at least going to provide backcourt depth.
Yeah. Coming over in the same trade that got Lou Williams in a Raptors jersey was Lucas Nogueira, or Bebe, as he's commonly known in his native Brazil. He's a very
All
young...
hair second team.
Huh?
All hair second team.
Yes. He might be on the...
Anderson Varejao was close, though. Same with Rolo. It's hard. A lot of good
I think his hair is better than Rolo and Varejao.
Okay. Maybe he got snubbed like Kyle Lowry.
Either way, he's on the Tin Man roster for our hair roster.
Exactly.
But beyond his awesome hair, Bebe is a very young, very lanky, and raw big man. He does have some promising upside as a rim as a rim protector, a rebounder, and he's a really good receiver of alley-oops. Him, Jonas Valanciunas, and Bruno Caboclo kind of represent the future of the Raptors. We'll see how he does this year, but I'm not expecting him to play a whole lot this season. It'll be more about the future of the Raptors.
Exactly. One guy who probably will be playing quite a bit this season is James Johnson. He's averaging about 27 minutes for their first 3 games. And he had a really solid year for the Grizzlies. He had his highest points per 36, field goal, free throw, offensive rebound, assist, block percentages. And the thing with him that's really good, he's sort of a nice counterpoint, I think, to Terrence Ross, in that he's this big, physical sort of wing defender, whereas Ross is a bit slighter and more mobile. And he's also a really strong finisher, and he can guard threes, he can guard a couple fours, and I think it was a pretty good signing. He isn't the best shooter, but he has other skills that he can bring.
Speaking of being able to bring some skills, there are questions about this player right now because he's so raw. I mean, Bruno Caboclo, the Raptors' first-round pick at number 20, he's been famously described as being 2 years away from being 2 years away. Well, he's a Raptor here and now. And he's 6'9" small forward with an absolutely ridiculous 7'7" wingspan. Let that sink in for a sec. He's 6'9" wing player with a 7'7" wingspan.
He puts the wing in wing player.
Yes. He is very raw, but he has shown flashes of a very solid shot from 3 in both the Summer League and the preseason so far. So he's not completely devoid of a skill set right now he can impact the team with if he gets playing time. But much like Bebe, I don't think he's going to get a whole lot of playing time this year. It'll be more about development for the future.
Exactly. And I'm typically not a proponent of the whole, we'll draft this guy and teach him how to play basketball strategy. But I think that Bruno is, I don't want to say an exception because he already has that good shot. But when you have a guy with a 7'7" wingspan who tries on defense, and you put him and he wasn't necessarily in a awesome sort of place to learn basketball. It was a pretty, Boy Scout league. I think that's the sort of thing where you can bank on him improving to some regard.
At the bare minimum, it's a pretty decent swing for the fences shot when you're at number 20 in the draft.
Absolutely. A guy who's more like a single or maybe a double, maybe more like a walk. Greg Stiebsma. He's your prototypical garbage man. He's a good rim protector. That's really good for a bench guy. 6% block rate, 2.8 blocks per 36. He crashes the boards. He plays pretty heady defense. And he doesn't really need anything called for him on offense. So as long as you're not expecting him to be going 20-10 out there, I think that he can be a pretty valuable piece for this Raptors team.
Yeah, I think he could be a decent, 4th or 5th big man rotation member. One guy who's not going to be a rotation member, at least this year, is the Raptors' second-round pick at number 37 in this last draft, DeAndre Daniels. He's, of course, a national champion with UConn, but this year he's going to be playing for the Perth Wildcats in the Australian NBL. So he won't be here this year, but maybe we'll see him next year running with Bruno, Bebe, and Jonas.
Speaking of won't be here this year, Steve Novak won't be here this year. That's a pretty big subtraction for them. Novak is an elite catch-and-shoot big guy. He's one of the best three-point threats in basketball. He's one of those guys who has one thing that he can do, but he does it so well that it makes him valuable. And it kind of reflected in how he performed last year. He led Toronto in three-point percentage, even though he only played 540 minutes. That's still a huge piece to be losing there. Having said that, he didn't play very much last year, so the impact on this Raptors offense and this Raptors roster, my bad, it's not gonna be the most heavily felt.
Yeah. Speaking of all these changes, how is it going to be felt in terms of possessions this season?
Okay, so the Raptors brought in 19 more possessions than they gave out during the offseason. Some people are going to be feeling a bit of a pinch.
Lou Williams, I'm looking at you.
I'm thinking that that's probably going to be most of them, and I think that the rest will just sort of sort themselves out. Lou Williams is not going to be the sort of fringe starter that he was in Atlanta. The Raptors already have a sixth-man combo guard. His name's Graves Vasquez, and he's awesome.
And Terrence Ross might see some of those two-guard minutes, too, if they're trying to get minutes for James Johnson at the wing.
Exactly. So a lot of those minutes just aren't going to be there. In that trade, Lou Williams was kind of more not that big of a deal. He's still going to be important, but it's not going to be as big of a deal as he was in Atlanta.
Yeah. Another kind of thing that we try to keep track of here when it's actually impactful is a thing we call rest differential, which is just a comparison of that team over the course of the season compared to opponents in terms of how many road back-to-backs, 3 games in 4 nights, and 4 games in 5 nights they play. Obviously, you want a high rest differential, and theirs is a positive 9, which means over the course of the season, they should be playing 9 less of those road back-to-backs or, 3 games, 4 nights, 4 games, 5 nights. So that extra rest should help them this year.
Absolutely. Speaking of 4 games, 5 nights, in like 4 seconds or so, we're going to do 5 questions.
Yeah. And here it is.
Yeah.
So, Will, do you think Jonas Valanciunas can make a leap this year?
Yes, I think he can. I think a lot of it is playing time related, and you also have to keep in mind the guy's 22.
Yeah.
If he can stay on the floor, he's had some problems with foul trouble in the past, which, to be fair, that's what you expect out of a 21-year-old big man.
Yeah.
And if he can protect the rim as well as he did in his first year in terms of getting blocks, statistically, that'd be a pretty big jump. I don't think that 15, 9, and a block and a half or 2 blocks on decent efficiency is all that far without of the question for a guy like Jonas. And I think that he can definitely continue to improve as a scorer, as a rebounder, as a defender. There's ways for him to grow.
Yep.
He's already really good, though.
Yep.
Speaking of really good, I thought it was really good that Toronto gave the green light from the three-point line to 2 typically more mid-range centric big guys in Patrick Patterson and Amir Johnson last year. Do you think this is a good thing, and do you think it might be something that more teams should be willing to try?
It kind of depends. I mean, both of those guys were already capable mid-range shooting bigs who do present some element of stretch to the offense. Patrick Patterson is a capable three-point shooter. I'm not so sure we can say that about Amir just yet. But teams are already doing this. I don't think anybody's really questioning it. I mean, we have LaMarcus Aldridge, Serge Ibaka, Blake Griffin. Even Utah has Enes Kanter and Trevor Booker shooting threes. So I think in the era of 2.9 defenses, stretching the floor, especially with your bigs, it has become, if not more valuable, at least in vogue. And because of that, more teams are trying to see if they can help their bigs take a single step or 2 back and shoot at least shoot more threes, even if they don't shoot them at a high percentage, just in order to try and draw the defense out a little further to open up more driving and passing lanes.
Yep. Absolutely.
With Speaking of Amir Johnson, he's one of several free agents, including Landry Fields, Chuck Hayes, Lou Williams, Greg Steemsma, and Psycho T, Tyler Hansbrough, who will all be free agents after this season. Assuming, with the possible exception of a couple of those guys, that the team, gets rid of their cap holds, waives their bird rights, and gets rid of their cap holds, they should have some nice cap space. Do you think they might be looking at making a run at any major free agents?
I don't know. Most of the free agents that are going to be like the typical big names in this upcoming free agency class, most of them are centers.
Yeah.
That's like a huge chunk. And I think this team's pretty all in on Jonas.
Yeah.
One guy who I think would be an interesting fit, but I don't think they go with, is Paul Millsap. But I think Millsap is probably sticking in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Other than that, most of them are wings. This team already has two good young wings. You have the centers. This team's already all in on Jonas. At point guard, they've kind of got Kyle Lowry. I think they're pretty much stuck on this core.
Yeah, and one other thing to factor in, even though Toronto is an amazing city, every single person I know who's ever been there says they loved it. It's not really a destination market. It's a huge market, don't get me wrong. It's not some small market, big market thing. It's one of the biggest markets in the league, actually. But it's not an attractive free agent destination. At least it hasn't been for a long time. So even if they were to go hard at a big name, I'm not so sure it would really work.
Agreed. Speaking of them maybe not be able to get a big name, I don't want to call Amir Johnson a big name, but compared to some of the other power forwards in this free agency class, he's going to be looked at pretty seriously. How much do you think he might get in free agency this offseason?
Well, it'll be interesting because there's a few other free agent bigs outside of the centers that we mentioned, we didn't really mention, but there's going to be a lot of centers like Marc Gasol, DeAndre Jordan, Omer Asik, etc. that'll be on the market. But there's also going to be some power forwards like Will said. Paul Millsap is one. LaMarcus Aldridge is another. Of course, Aldridge is almost guaranteed to re-sign with Portland. And likewise with some of those centers, that they're most likely just going to re-sign with their current team. Given the fact that the cap is going to rise and they might introduce some of the smoothing effect from the soon-to-be new TV deal this next offseason, it's possible it rises a fair amount. And in which case, teams that were kind of hoping to woo a Marc Gasol or a LaMarcus Aldridge type and miss out on those guys might take a look at Amir. He's not obviously as offensively gifted necessarily as any of those guys, but teams that value analytics a lot will think highly of Amir. And because of the impending cap increases, I think teams are loosening the purse strings a little bit more. I think they're a little more comfortable with like, oh, he wants an extra $2 million. Okay, but like in a couple years, it's not going to matter. So I think he will definitely do better than the current $7 million he's making this year. I don't know how big a deal he gets, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it hit double figures in terms
of
4
years, 48?
Like 10 plus mil per season.
I think like 448.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that.
I agree.
Well, Amir Johnson's a member of this core. One thing that Masai Ujiri is kind of noted for is he really values kind of consistency and asset maintenance. Do you think that going forward, this core of Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, Jonas Valanciunas, Amir Johnson, Terrence Ross, Are they good enough to actually be legit championship contenders in the near future, or might there need to be some tweaks? And if it's Masai behind the wheel, would we really expect any major tweaks necessarily?
Yeah, I don't think we can expect that many major tweaks, especially considering Toronto as a market and Masai's history, both of which you've alluded to. I think this team, and I'll go on record and say it, I think that this team can contend if they improve the bench a little bit, which is something that I'm sure Masai is looking to do, and I think they can make it on internal development. If you look at the guys like DeRozan, Terrence Ross, Valanciunas, they're still improving. And if a guy like DeRozan, for example, can work on his shot and even get it to average and maybe improve some of his shot selection habits, that's helping this team out. If Valanciunas can learn to stay out of foul trouble and become a little bit better as a rim protector, that's helping this team out. If Terrence Ross can continue to just get better and better, he improved so much from his rookie to his sophomore year, that'll help this team out. And then all of a sudden, we're going from a 48-win team to a 54-55-win team. And that's, in this Eastern Conference, I wouldn't put them above, even if they do have an improved bench and personnel improvements. I wouldn't say, oh, they're going to be better than Chicago. Oh, they're going to be better than Cleveland. But that, in a 7-game series, it could happen.
And I mean, from the perspective of being if you're defining contender in the sense that they could get to the finals, considering they play in the East, it's possible.
Yes.
I don't know if, under my definition of contender, that they could get to the finals and stand a really good shot at winning against a Western Conference team that has to go through a hell of a really epic, terrible, horrifyingly difficult journey to even get to the finals.
They have to go through 3 other contenders.
Yeah, I think they wouldn't qualify as a contender under my definition, but in terms of being able to potentially get to the finals, I think, like you said, with some internal development and maybe a tightening of the bench, they'd be able to at least put themselves in an advantageous position to do so if they get the right matchups in the playoffs.
Absolutely. Speaking of advantageous, predictions are pretty advantageous for a team preview, and we like to do ours with the thing we call 20-50-80. We predict a thing that's 20% likely to happen, 50% likely to happen, and 80% likely to happen. So Josh, what are your predictions?
So I think it's 20% likely that the Raptors get to the Eastern Conference Finals.
Okay.
It'll definitely depend on, where they're seated, who they'd have to play in the second round, and matchups. But I think they're going to be better this year, and I think continuity is going to help them. Mm-hmm. And I think they stand a decent shot at getting to the Eastern Conference Finals.
Agreed.
I think it's 50% likely that Kyle Lowry finally gets that All-Star spot that he was snubbed for last year.
Yeah.
The only reason it's not higher is because, Derrick Rose is back, Rondo's back. Mm-hmm. Both of those guys are probably going to get some votes All-Star-wise.
Yep.
I think it's 80% likely that the Raptors will once again have home court advantage in the first round.
Pretty. I like that prediction.
I'm fairly confident that they'll wind up winning the Atlantic Division, in which case they're automatically given a top 4 seed.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's 20% likely, kind of making the Bruno Caboclo prediction here, that Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, and Jonas Valanciunas are all on the All-Star team.
Bold.
Kyle Lowry can make it for reasons we've mentioned. DeMar DeRozan can make it for reasons we've mentioned. Mm-hmm. But I think Jonas, if he can get up to 32, 33 minutes a game, the per 36 numbers look like an all-star. He's at 14, 11, 2 blocks-ish. He's going to continue to improve. If he can get 32, 33 minutes a game, he continues to work on his touch and his shot a little bit, and he improves as a rim protector and maybe can get a couple more blocks, all of a sudden we're looking at a guy who's going 15, 9 to 10 boards, and a block and a half, 2 blocks. In the Eastern Conference, that gives you a legitimate claim to, at least from a statistical standpoint, being the second best center. Okay, third, forgot Bosh, because I think Bosh is like a power forward type. But in terms of like a traditional center, you're like the second best one. And I think that could get him in. If it could get in Roy Hibbert, not saying he's nearly the defensive
Jamal
anchor that Hibbert
Naglior
is.
in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He can get in.
It's possible.
Speaking of things that are possible, I think that it's 50% likely and entirely possible that we're looking at a 50-win team here.
Yeah, it would only be what, like an extra 2 games?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
Internal, if they can stay as healthy as last year, I'd put it a little higher, because I think that internal development is going to help them out quite a bit because they're so young. The oldest guy on this roster is Chuck Hayes. They only have one person who's 30.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy. Their second oldest player on the team is Steamsma. The third is Psycho T. And Psycho T got drafted, 4 or 5 years ago? So they're really young. They're going to get better. But I would be higher on it because of that. But the injuries are going to be a little bit... They lucked out.
Yeah, I'm inclined to think they should be at least still pretty good in terms of keeping guys on the court.
Agreed. Speaking of a guy they want on the court, I think that it's 80% likely that they re-sign Amir Johnson. One thing that you have to keep in mind with Masai is that he likes to retain the guys he likes.
Yep.
JaVale McGee. Danilo Gallinari. So I think that they're going to give him a nice, fat, juicy offer at the end of the season.
I think you might be
figures.
accurate from your previous suggestion of 4 years, 48. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. So unless they're really going to try to bring in a guy like Millsap, which I don't think they're going to do. It'd be cool if they did it, but I don't think they're going to.
Well, another aspect is Amir is very, very respected organizationally, and he is by far the fan favorite.
That, and he's a killer in terms of being an
and he's
awesome
good on the court,
community.
yeah.
In the community, like, have you seen this guy? He literally went to, like, I think it was every single Best Buy and every single record store and bought like thousands of copies of the new Drake album and just gave them to people.
Yep.
He's been on Canadian television talking about cleaning, like Swiffers and stuff. I mean, he's been everywhere and done everything for this community. You can't get rid of Amir. Even you just can't do it. So
Yeah.
I think that they re-sign him.
Agreed.
So Amir Johnson's good, but are the Raptors going to be good? What are your thoughts, Josh?
I think they're going to be one of the top 5 teams in the East.
I think you're entirely right. And I think that they're a good team, but I don't know where they should really go from here. But where you should go from here is on that like button, or on that dislike button, or in the comment section down below, telling us how you think we're crazy for thinking that, or I'm crazy for thinking that all 3 of those guys could make an all-star team, or maybe talk about Amir Johnson and Swiffers. Additionally, you can share this video on Twitter or Facebook, and it'd be really, really cool and help us out a lot if you could hit that subscribe button down below. That's going to keep you notified of all of our future team previews. I think that's a wrap. So take care, guys. I really appreciate you watching this.
Have a good one.
Bye.